Introduce me. My name is Sara Maruyama, and I'm a second-year master's student in the Department of Food Science and Technology at Oregon State. Over the past 20 months or so, my advisors and I have been working to uncover consumer preferences for food with a particular focus on the clean label movement. So I'm going to just dive straight into my research, and I'm going to start with just a bit of background on the clean label movement itself. So this is a consumer-driven trend that favors natural foods. And while we do not have a legal definition of what a natural food actually is, the research available indicates that consumers consider these foods to be those that have familiar ingredients in them, as well as ones that have simple and short ingredient lists. So in terms of food manufacturers looking to reformulate to meet clean label standards, we all know that this process comes with two very big implications. The first of which is that when you do this, the production costs usually go up and your sensory qualities usually go down. And this research and the clean label movement is highly relevant to the dairy industry in particular, because the retail landscape as we know it today has become very, very competitive for both foods and beverages. And there's also a decline in the retail sales of dairy products. So thus it's important for dairy manufacturers to succeed in a competitive landscape. And in order to do this, we need to uncover what these consumer preferences really are. So I'll now go over our project and research objectives. Our overarching project objective is to investigate naturalness perception of ingredients in dairy products. And this can further be broken down into two research objectives, the first of which being to understand how consumers perceive common ingredients in dairy products. And to accomplish this, we conducted a consumer survey. The second objective is to investigate the impact of product characteristics on consumer preferences. And this was accomplished by using a choice experiment. So in both of these studies, what we did was we used a focal product to elicit consumer perceptions and preferences. And the focal product that we used was yogurt. So now let me go over my consumer survey. This was designed in a program called Qualtrics. And in our Qualtrics survey, we tested 20 different ingredients, which included various sugars, stabilizers or thickeners, coloring agents, and preservatives. We had these consumers who participated in this study rate these ingredients using a 10-point scale, very similar to the format you see here. And I'll zoom in on that for you. Here you can see that our scales were anchored at a 1 being considered very unnatural and a 10 being considered very natural. In addition to asking our respondents to rate perceived naturalness of these ingredients, we also had them rate a smaller selection of them based on how acceptable they deemed them to be, as well as how familiar they were with them. And in addition to rating questions, we also collected a variety of different sociodemographic information on these individuals. Some of this information was used in a regression analysis to test for correlations between sociodemographic characteristics and perceived naturalness. However, due to time constraints, I won't be presenting those findings today. However, if we have time, please feel free to ask me or reach out to me via email. And as you can imagine, the results of this survey were then used to guide the experimental design of our second research objective. So now I will be going over one portion of my survey results, which was used to design our choice experiment. And in this study, we collected 526 completed responses. So this figure here displays the 20 ingredients that we tested in our survey. And what we've done here is we have ranked them in descending order based on their mean naturalness perception scores. So cane sugar, which is located on the very left-hand side, was found to be the most natural ingredient. And red 40 on the very right was found to be the least natural. In addition to ranking these, we have also color-coded them based on their respective categories. Doing this simply allows us to visually see how these categories compare with one another. So one of the first observations we noted was that the sweeteners or sugars, which are indicated in yellow, were generally perceived as being natural. And we made this judgment based on the fact that they ranked within the top 50% of these ingredients. Next, you'll notice that the coloring agents in green and the preservatives in orange were found to be quite polarizing. This was judged because these ingredients were ranked either within the top or bottom 4 ingredients. And last but not least, we tested quite a few different stabilizers and thickeners. And we noticed that there didn't seem to be, we noticed that these ingredients didn't really seem to be perceived as very natural by our consumers. And we didn't notice any polarizing effect within that category like we had seen with some of the others. This indicated to us that perhaps as a category in general, consumers don't really see stabilizers as being natural. And given this finding, I chose to focus on this category for my second study objective. So if you recall, my second research objective was to investigate the impact of product characteristics on consumer preferences. And to accomplish this, we conducted a choice experiment to explore how product characteristics impact consumer preferences for plain 32-ounce family-size varieties of yogurt. And in this following slide, I will explain what a choice experiment is. So the most effective way I find to explain a choice experiment is to explain it through a choice set. Respondents who participate in these types of studies make selections for hypothetical goods or services across several choice sets, like you see here. Through these choice sets, we can elicit what characteristics are driving consumer preferences for those goods or services that are in question. So here you can see in this example, we are looking at consumer preferences for high top shoes. And these shoes can be described by 3 different attributes. The first of which being is the color of the shoe. Next, we have the brand recognition. And finally, we have a price attribute. And price is a very standard attribute that are used in these studies. So these attributes would vary across the choice sets that are presented to each of the participants, and also included within each of these choice sets is an opt-out option. And this no purchase option is really important here because with very few exceptions in the real world, we're never forced to buy something that we don't want. So now I'd like to bring you back to those stabilizers that we tested in our survey. There were 10 of them total, and unfortunately, due to resource constraints, we couldn't feasibly test all of them. So what I did was I selected 4, and I chose pectin and cornstarch and milk protein concentrate because they are 3 different stabilizers that I saw quite frequently on yogurt labels that are available in stores. Now, I also included carrageenan, and carrageenan isn't really used in very many yogurt formulations. However, it's a very important stabilizer in the dairy industry. And it's also a stabilizer that was received a lot of negative press in the past. So combine that with the fact that in our survey, our respondents rated this ingredient as being fairly unfamiliar to them. I wanted to test it in my experiment to see if they're truly avoiding this ingredient like we think they are. So in our yogurt choice experiment, we tested 36 different yogurts utilizing a 2-block design. And in this experiment, each participant made choices in 11 different choice sets, very much like the one you see here. Each choice set contained 2 32-ounce plain yogurts that were described by the following attributes. The first attribute was, of course, an ingredient list. Now, each ingredient list consisted of a baseline list of just cultured pasteurized milk. The yogurts that just had this baseline list were identified in our analysis as our clean label yogurts. Each additional ingredient list could then have anywhere from 1 to 4 different stabilizers in it, the 4 that I explained in my previous slide. So our next attribute is a quality attribute. And because stabilizers are important, or because we're focusing on stabilizers, and because stabilizers are important for yogurt texture, I wanted to focus on texture as our quality attribute. So instead of providing actual textural terms, what we decided to go with was a description of the textures of these yogurts. So one description was identified as a good texture in our analysis, and that is described as consumers generally perceive the texture of this yogurt to be good and free of defects, for example, smooth and creamy. And then the poor texture was described as consumers generally perceive the texture of this yogurt to have some defects, for example, grainy or lumpy. And last but not least, we have our price attribute. For this, we selected 3 different levels, and these prices are based off actual retail prices of plain family-sized yogurts that can be purchased here in Corvallis. So with any consumer study that examines a particular product like yogurt, it's important that you recruit to the right kind of consumers. So the main inclusion criteria for the study was that these consumers had to purchase 32-ounce sized plain yogurts at least once every other week. And we compensated them with $10 cash. So now I'll go over the results of my choice experiment. For this study, we had 250 participants. So we analyzed our data using an alternative specific mixed logit. And this is a very common regression analysis that's employed on choice data. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a table that displays the different variables we plugged into our analysis and their associated estimates or coefficients. So from this table, we can answer several questions of interest. The first of which being, is a clean label important for choice? And as you would expect, the answer is yes. When we look at our variable clean label, you'll notice that it has a significant estimate. The estimate is quite large and it's positive. So yes, a clean label increases the likelihood of a purchase, holding all other variables constant. Next question is whether or not texture is important for choice. And as you would expect again, the answer is yes. What we've done here is we've created a variable poor texture. And poor texture has, again, a significant estimate, one that is quite large and negative as you would anticipate. So texture is important for a purchase, and in particular, poor texture decreases the likelihood of a purchase, holding all other variables constant. But what about poor texture in a clean label yogurt? Well, the answer is it still increases the likelihood of a purchase, because when we look at the interaction between clean label and poor texture, our significant estimate is still positive. And last but not least, beyond just the clean label, are there any specific ingredients that these consumers are avoiding? To answer that, there was only just one, and that was cornstarch. And this is really surprising because we thought carrageenan would be another ingredient that they were looking to avoid, but that wasn't the case here. And this is really interesting when you go back and look at our survey results, because cornstarch, here underneath the red arrow, was one of the more naturally perceived stabilizers, second only to pectin. So to quickly summarize these findings, a clean label is important. Based on our choice experiment, on average, a clean label increased the likelihood of a choice. Another part is that texture is also important. However, on average, consumers will accept a textural defect for a clean label. Based on our survey, stabilizers were not found to be perceived as being very natural or acceptable by consumers. What this means for food companies is that if you have products that have stabilizers in them and you're looking to reformulate them to meet clean label expectations, that will be challenging. I'm not saying you should necessarily remove all of your stabilizers, but you should definitely do some rigorous consumer testing to ensure that the choice you make for that food meets your business model. Another piece that I didn't mention earlier is that providing an ingredient source has the potential to improve ingredient acceptance. This is the result of some paired t-tests. And then finally, cornstarch was the only ingredient found to significantly negatively impact the likelihood of a choice. This is really important because while this ingredient was found to be rather benign, as a standalone ingredient in our survey, it was judged very differently on a food label. This reinforces the importance of contexts in studies like this that investigate consumer behavior. So these are my references, and a big thank you to Bill Derry, Dairy Gold, my advisors, you, Dr. Goddick, and everyone else who's made this research possible. And that concludes my presentation.